It is my pleasure to introduce Anne Shlay, who should unmute. Anne is is a professor of sociology and faculty member of the Middle East Studies Center at Georgia State University. She's been a visiting professor of geography at Hebrew University since 2007, and is co-author of Jerusalem, The Spatial Politics of a Divided Metropolis. And with that, please welcome Anne Shlay. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and so thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to start off by briefly talking about the film itself. We know that Danai Alon, the filmmaker, goes on a journey, and the journey is that she is returning to live in Jerusalem. Now, it's not that she's making aliyah for any religious reason. She's going there. My understanding, she's going there to essentially prove her father wrong. Her father was a famous writer, politically active, and like many Israelis of that era, got very depressed over what was going on with Israel, particularly Jerusalem. And so he became very bitter. He despised Jerusalem, and he was very angry and depressed, and he left. He didn't stay to be angry and articulate his views. He decided to just get out of there. And so, in some ways, I think her return was to basically prove her dad wrong, which, a lot of us try to do that over time. And so she wanted to become really part of the solution. She wanted to integrate her Jewish family into an Arab Jewish Jerusalem. And so she wanted to be part of a Jerusalem based on mutual love, integration, and respect. She wanted to have shared values with the people of Jerusalem and Israel, and she wanted to build a new Jerusalem. So out of this bitterness, she wanted to show her dad, who was deceased, that indeed there was a new Jerusalem that was happy and warm, and that could be a home for both Jews and Palestinians and everybody else. So she wanted us to show him that change was possible. So her family and her vehicle were in some ways intended to be an instrument for social change. She wanted to prove her father wrong, but she also wanted to do good. And it's through her husband and her kids that she inevitably realizes that she's in a political and ideological mess. Her kids, friends with Arab children, do not see themselves as political agents. They like their friends. They don't want to analyze their friends. They just want friends. So they're not part of this vision that she has for doing good, even though they're doing good. Her husband, while Jewish, experiences intolerance that accompanies North African and Middle Eastern Jewish migrants. That while he's Jewish, he's closer to Mizrahi, which dark skin, and he's North African, and so he faces discrimination based on what kind of Jew he is racially and geographically. And this Mizrahi, we'll talk about that in a minute, they seek some kind of equivalence to the political and economic dominance of Ashkenazis, who are more white Jews that are part of the Russian, German, European immigration to Israel. So, and I'll talk more about those divisions, but what he experiences much more than she does is that Israel has a racial hierarchy. But her vehicle for social change is showing her reality in this film that shows her and her family. And it's very interesting. But what happens is that when they recognize that it's not going right, they leave. And what it is they have the money to experiment with being Jewish Israelis. They have the money to leave when it doesn't work out. And that certainly is not the case for many Israelis. Yeah. So one question is this film representative of Jerusalem? Udi said that some people might consider this a very left film. I didn't consider it left so much. I just considered it her slice of Jerusalem. But I feel that her reality and her experiences aren't generalizable, that this is not certainly the Jerusalem that I know. And her Jerusalem is middle class, has expensive homes in low density, non-religious suburbs. It's an exclusive environment. It's not the Jerusalem of every day. Jerusalem of every day is high density. People don't live in single family homes. It's aggressive. People are not very nice to each other. It's very poor. It's very ideological, and this is largely between religious people and non-religious people. And it's filled with a ton of conflict, and it's racial, religious, and ethnic. And the largest conflict isn't between Jews and Palestinians, it's between Jews, our people. And it's really between the Haredim, or the ultra-Orthodox, and the secular Jews, who are Jews by identity and may or may not be religious, but are not ultra-Orthodox. And as it is in Jerusalem, where a lot of ultra-Orthodox people live, the secular Jews and the religious Jews, the Haredim, they can't even live with each other. They have to live in separate communities. So that is the biggest conflict that she doesn't raise at all. There's tremendous discrimination, and your speaker for next time, I think, is probably going to address that a lot more, is there's tremendous discrimination and conflict against Black Ethiopians. So race is a critical factor in Jerusalem. There are fights over so many things. There are fights over prayers, and with the Haredim, it's really important how you pray, who gets to pray, who prays, and who prays with whom. So without any Palestinians at all, Jerusalem is already a massive division. Can we all get along? Well, probably not. And so the Palestinians in some ways are distractions, an everyday distraction from some of the other divisions that are in Jerusalem. And I think people in Jerusalem probably pay more attention to their own divisions within their own religion than they do with the Palestinians, which is a problem in its own right. So our filmmaker, she doesn't live in Jerusalem. She visits Jerusalem. And unlike most Jerusalemites, she has an escape route. And so when the going gets tough, she leaves. My perspective on the film is film versus fact. Now, our filmmaker is an artist. And it seems like it's a very artistic and quite good film from an artistic point of view. I can't really judge it from that because I'm a social scientist. Art is personal, and the perspectives are very different. Social scientists seek to avoid the personal, and they try, often failing, but they try to separate facts from feelings. It's never completely successful, but it's certainly a good faith effort. And so what I want to do is give you an introduction to some of my facts. And so I want to do a brief schematic of some issues. And there are two things I want to talk about, and they come directly from my book. And one of them is, what is Jerusalem? Which is very complicated. And the other one is, who is Jerusalem? So let me talk first about what is Jerusalem. And I must do this share screen. See if I can do this right. And then, oh, I did it. Thank you, Udi. So what I want to show you is this map. This is a map of Greater Jerusalem, and it's very complicated, and I won't be able to go into all of it, but what I want to point out to you are several things. First, that the definition of what is Jerusalem is contentious. It is fought about. There is no consensus on what is Jerusalem. Many Jews in the United States in particular think they know what is Jerusalem, but if they go outside of America, they will talk to people who don't think that their definition of Jerusalem is Jerusalem at all. And certainly internationally, it is not the case. I would call it the old Jerusalem, but West Jerusalem is the Jerusalem of post 1948. This is a Jerusalem that was created after the 1948 war. But in 1967, as you all know, there was a war, and the Israeli soldiers captured a large amount of land. It goes all the way out here. And then in 1993, it officially annexed this land in here. So what you have here is this area here. When I'm going around and around with this pointer, the dark blue and the tan areas that are outside of this green area, which is called the Green Line, these are the areas that were annexed to Jerusalem they were captured in Jerusalem in 1967, and they were annexed by Israel on May 19th, 1993, which is now called Jerusalem Day. And that's a big holiday, and I could talk a lot about that holiday too. The post, let me see here. The post 1967 non-annexed parts of Jerusalem are the West Bank. So what you have here is West Jerusalem, which conventionally everybody recognizes politically as Jerusalem. You have this East Jerusalem that was annexed in 1993, which is considered illegal by most of the world and is considered illegitimate in terms of its boundaries. And then you have this entire area out here, well, it's here too, that is considered to be areas that are not yet owned by Israel but are occupied by Israel. And that's the map as I present it to you. What is a settlement? All the areas outside of Jerusalem are considered by international law to be settlements. So the first time I went to Jerusalem, I lived in the French Hill near the university right here, and I thought I was living in what everybody thought was Israel. And then I found out later on that I was living in what lots of people call a settlement, and that really woke me up. So I want to make several points here. One is that the old city here, this is right here, it's outside of the Green Line. It was captured in 1967. And I'll talk about the old city in a minute, but it is not recognized as being part of legally defined Jerusalem. There's an Israel definition of Jerusalem, and then there's an international definition of Jerusalem. And these are the main battle lines over what is Jerusalem, and it's a major source of conflict. And I don't think that you can really begin to understand conflict in Jerusalem without understanding that Jerusalem is the ultimate contested city, that there is little agreement over what Jerusalem is. And there's no consensus on the definition. And we can get, I'm sure they may not be agreeable, but it's something that warrants discussion. So, I mean, an example of some of the controversy associated with this is internationally, Jerusalem was not recognized as being the capital of Israel because it was considered illegal. So most of the embassies for countries outside of Israel are located in Tel Aviv. The U.S. embassy was located in Tel Aviv. There's a consulate in Jerusalem. It was right about over here. Under the regime of President Trump, he decided that for a variety of reasons, that he would call Jerusalem the capital of Israel. So he moved the capital to right here. So it's considered to be on no man's land, and that's another story. But it's sort of straggling over the line between East and West Jerusalem. So that's where the new American embassy is, and this was considered very controversial, and people can talk about that if they want. But that's the American embassy in Jerusalem is not recognized by the UN as being legal. And so, what is Jerusalem? Politically, it's very complicated. It's not so complicated if you view Jerusalem as a Jerusalem of memory, because her Jerusalem was this part of West Jerusalem that was very elite and different from the reality that people experience on a routine basis in Jerusalem. And people experience it differently, which is a whole nother story. Our filmmaker is the child of pre-1967 Jerusalem. She grew up in a wealthy, beautiful, secular part of West Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem of the past. I mean, it's still wealthy and beautiful, but it's not the whole shebang in terms of what is Jerusalem. This is the Jerusalem of the future. And she came back for her Jerusalem of memory. And the problem with going back to a memory is that memory may or may not exist. And I would argue that her Jerusalem of memory is essentially gone. So what I want to do now also quickly is turn to who is Jerusalem. And I want to give you a snapshot of some of the people who live there and the divisions that exist among and between them. Jerusalem is claimed by religious. Jerusalem is claimed by religious people. The three major groups, which I'm sure you know, but just to reiterate, they're the Muslims, and their primary spiritual home is in the Old City. It's the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And if you ever have a chance to go up there, because you have to go up from the Western Wall, it is one of the most beautiful areas you will ever see in your life. I'm not sure if they're letting people up there now, but it's hotly contested, in part because Jews also claim that area as being the site of the original temple and the Temple Mount. So I'm not going to go into that except to say it is contested, but it is beautiful, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and the whole scenario of trees, and it's just spiritually uplifting. So that's one part. So that's for the Muslims. Then the Jews have their part of the Old City, with their major religious site being the Western Wall. And as I'm sure you all know, that's the remaining wall of the Second Temple, and it is very holy, and that is where Jews pray. And we'll get into that in just a minute as well. And then we have the Christians, and the Christians occupy the Christian quarter of the Old City, and they have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I must tell you, as Jews, you may be more focused on the Western Wall, but the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has my heart. It is spiritually breathing. It is alive, and so I want to I'm an Old City junkie, so I highly recommend going there and experiencing all three of these wonderful sites that are so much a part of the spiritual global world in which we live. Now, there are divisions in Jerusalem's Jewish community, which I want to focus on, and the divisions among Jews is really pretty lethal. It may be hidden, but it's lethal, and so it's secular Jews versus the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox. So it's Jew against Jew, and I don't mean that they fight necessarily, although they do, but they differ dramatically in terms of how they see the world and what they want to do with their lives. And excuse me. The Haredim, they don't believe or obey secular laws. the laws of Jerusalem, they're not their laws. They don't agree with them. They do not see themselves as being part of the state of Israel. And it's critical for people to understand, it was critical for me to understand that their behavior is guided by some other thing, and they refuse to conform to the laws of the state of Israel. I mean, if it's convenient, they will, but most of the time they will fight it tooth and nail.
Excuse me, Anne. I mean, are we talking Niture Karta, or what proportion of the religious population of Israel does not recognize the government of Israel?
All the Haredim don't. They don't recognize the government because they don't believe that the government is going to. What they believe. This is what they believe in. They believe that their role in Jerusalem is to keep it safe for the Messiah. The Messiah is everything. So they may obey the laws of the government, or they may not, depending on whether or not that conforms to what they think is reasonable in order to protect Jerusalem for the coming of the Messiah. That's the ultimate, and that guides almost every aspect of their lives. Does that answer your question? Okay. They don't believe in secular laws, and so here we have. This is Hamashiach. This is one of the people worshipped by the Haredim. It's considered to be the spiritual leader, although he's dead. You will see his picture everywhere in Jerusalem. He's on buses. When I'm back in Jerusalem when I see a picture of Hamashiach. But he is considered to be the guiding force of many segments of the Haredim community. So this is not Bibi. This is who they listen to. The Haredim, they don't believe in protecting the state of Israel. They refuse to serve in the army. And that is a huge division in Israel because the army is compulsory and everybody serves in the army except for the Haredim. And that is a major bone of contention because serving in the army is, as Udi, I think, served in the army, it's very difficult. It's not fun. And it takes up 3 years of their lives for men and 2 years for women. And the Haredim do not believe in serving in the army. This is a photo of men in a demonstration. There were women there too, but they were segregated. They were demonstrating against the proposed law. Here's Mashiach. They're demonstrating against the proposed law to recruit Haredim into the military. Huge demonstrations, 1 million people. They had to shut down the city for this demonstration. And I went and took pictures. But they will not serve in the army. And they later protested and it got waived and they're not serving in the army. So they won't serve in the army. They don't believe in the state of Israel. And they believe in other kinds of laws to protect Jerusalem for the coming of the Messiah. And one way they do that is in terms of dress. As you see, the men dress in this way with their hats, and they always keep their heads covered. Underneath there is a black yarmulke. And what they do with women, this is a sign which I can't really translate, but there are signs all over Orthodox Haredi neighborhoods that tell you that if you're not dressed appropriately, women, if you're not dressed appropriately, you cannot come into their community. And by dressing appropriately, it means long sleeves, long dresses below the knees, stockings, shoes. And so if you're a tourist and you're wandering around with your sleeveless dress, you could face the possibility of having rocks thrown at you or something else, because they do not believe. They believe that if you dress that way, you are also getting in the way of the coming of the Messiah.
I'll just quickly translate the sign. This is a private property. Please do not, and it's addressed to a female reader. Please do not pass in our neighborhood with immodest dress. And then below it, it indicates, the definition of immodest dress or modest dress with a long sleeve shirt and so on.
Thank you. I wish I'd had a translation, but I didn't. So thank you very much. So that's how women must dress, and women in this community do dress that way. So there's this our Haredi perspective on what will keep Jerusalem safe for the coming of the Messiah, and it really gets and it's almost messianic. This is Machane Yehuda, which is the largest outdoor market in Jerusalem. It's one of my favorite places. This is Friday night at Machane Yehuda, which is always just so much fun. But what happens every Friday night is the Haredim set up these stands to teach people how. I'm now what are these tefillin? I'm blanking on tefillin. To teach men how to wear tefillin. And here's a pupil who is learning how to pray with tefillin. So it's very important to basically do outreach for the Haredim, the Hasidic community, to get other people, Jews, Americans, Jews, and Israeli Jews, to conform to the life of the Haredim. And nowhere else is it more illustrated as it is in the Old City at the Western Wall. And I don't know if you may not recognize the Western Wall if you're a man, because or either way, because the Western Wall is divided. There's a very large space over here, which is for men, and then there's a very small space over here, which is for women. And there are different rules for different sides. The men pray out loud. They can sing. They can do all sorts of things. The women are not allowed to pray out loud. They have to be silent. And so you'll often see women at the praying at the wall, and their lips are moving, but no sound is coming out. This is one of the rules associated with the Haredim in terms of protecting this place, the holiest place they consider as part of Jerusalem. They are worried that the women will basically not permit the Messiah to come if they pray out loud. There's a movement that's been around for over 30 years called Women of the Wall, and some of you may have heard of it. The Women of the Wall, is their goal is to basically promote equality between women and men at the Western Wall. And one of the main things that they do on Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month, is they ask women to come and do it's a demonstration, but it's a demonstration of women praying, and they pray out loud and they sing. And I was able to participate in one of them. And what's here the women are praying, and here the men are standing on chairs, because this is it's a mechitza, which is a division between men and women that you often see in synagogues, not conservative, which divides the men and women, and the men are standing on chairs screaming at the women and trying to drown them out. And it was really a cacophony of things, because there are also men on the other side that were praying out loud with the women to drown out the men that were screaming. It's very interesting. And just so you can see, this is one guy who is really, really, really irate about this. And so what I'm emphasizing again is that Jerusalem is contested in a variety of ways. And it's not just between Palestinians and Jews. And so what I want to show you with this last picture, I want to show you, this is, I'm sure many of you have heard of it. This is a picture of what's called the security, they call it many things. It's called the security barrier, it's called a fence, and it's called a wall. This aspect of the security barrier is a wall. It's not, so it's wall, fence, security barriers. Most of it is a chain link fence that's electric and monitored. But in Jerusalem and that most of the dividing barriers are 10 feet walls. And and they do slice parts of East Jerusalem out of regular Jerusalem. That's another story. But this is a Jerusalem community. This was a community of Palestinians in East Jerusalem that was annexed in 1967, annexed in 1993 after capture in 1967, and it was walled out of the city in 2003 or 4 when they built this wall. What this means is that for this particular neighborhood, they're walled out, so they're part of the city of Jerusalem, but they don't get city services. So there's no garbage collection, and the place is an absolute mess. And there are reasons why people argue why the wall separated this Jewish community, this Jerusalem community from Jerusalem, but the result is a mess. And so I just want to go back and show you the wall, the proposed security fence. A lot of it is already built, and the reason it was built was to cut down on what are you calling them? Bombings, the terrorist bombings that were coming from East Jerusalem, no, from outside of Jerusalem, and so that the wall is shown here in red, and so as you can see, the wall is really going to wall in all of this, and here this is the West Bank. It's not part of Jerusalem, but these are very large settlements here, and they're going to wall those in as well. And so this map is complicated, but it does give you a pretty good sense of the politics around the definition of Jerusalem. I want to end with, I know this is a very sober analysis of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem, from my point of view, is the most interesting place in the world. And I am so happy to have had so many experiences to study it and live there. And some of my best friends live there, and I can't wait to go back. It's not a place for nightlife or exotic shopping, although there's a mall. There is a big mall, and there's the Mamil Mall, so you can do some shopping. But I gotta say that there's great feeling about Jerusalem, and that feeling comes through on an everyday basis. And so it's hard not to be captured by the love that people have of Jerusalem. And that's true for Palestinians as well as Jews, both secular and non-secular Jews. So it's not easy. It's not easy to live in Jerusalem for anybody. Now, we know that the Jerusalem national anthem is Hatikva, which means the hope. And so it's with that hope that we keep going back and we keep trying to understand it. And we keep praying that there is this potential for love, as exhibited by this wonderful Ahava statue, which means love. And so this is the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. All right, why don't we open it up for questions? Feel free to speak up or wave your hand. I'm not sure I'll see anybody. Maybe put it in, let me see if there's, or you can put it in the chat as well. Go ahead, Steve Eisdorfer.
So can you share your slides for a moment? And in particular, I want to see slide 4 again.
Which is what?
Machane Yehuda.
Machane. Okay. Yes, that's Machane.
There. So my question is, this is a Chabad.
Yes.
This is a Chabad stand. These are Chabadniks.
That's not a Chabad center. This is the market.
No, but this is a Chabad stand. This is a Chabad practice.
Yes.
This business of teaching. If you go back to slide 2, that's also Chabad. In fact, all the posters with Schneerson, they're all Chabad.
Yes.
Chabad represents only a small portion of the Haredim. Eliezer Shach, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Pajnan Yeshiva, one of the largest Litvakish yeshiva, a center of ultra-Orthodoxy, thinks that Chabad was publicly said, Chabadniks aren't really Jews at all. That he said, he was asked, what religion in the world is most like Judaism? And without missing a beat, he said, Chabad. So it seems to me that you attribute to the Haredim generally the specific and rather eccentric views of Chabad. I don't think Haredim generally regard Schneerson as the Moshiach, but Chabad is very publicly oriented, they're PR oriented, and they do put posters up every place. So I'm just not sure I trust your account of the Haredim.
Well, I have to say I haven't done a lot of work distinguishing the Chabad from other Haredim. But my point is that Haredim, regardless of which denomination they're part of, cannot live with secular Jews. There are places where people fight, secular Jews fight the entrance of Haredi Jews, which if there's a huge housing problem, because they know that once they get the entrance of a Haredi family, the demand for secular Jews will go down and the neighborhood will turn Haredi. They're constantly building cities for Haredim to go live there. Now, I have not made the distinction between Chabad and other kinds of Haredis. And I don't question your knowledge of that. It's just not a distinction I've made. So if I'm just the Haredim per se are considered to be a group that has to be segregated. And it's true that none of them believe in the state of Israel.
So what do you make of United Torah Judaism, which has been a coalition member of most of the Israeli governments for the past 20 years, which is governed by the Council of Torah Sages and is a Haredi party? I don't understand how you can have a Haredi party and talk about Haredim as a general matter, as distinguished, for example, Natarei Karta, which Udi mentioned, who are clearly don't believe in the government. But I'm not sure that you can say that Haredim in general don't believe in the government. They have played an active role in the government for the past 20 years.
In order to protect Jerusalem for the coming of the Messiah. It's not that they're not politically smart or astute. In fact, they're some of the most politically astute people in Jerusalem. And so they have to be part of the government and in many ways, Jerusalem's government is the government of the Haredim. And I'm sure you know that David Ben-Gurion made a deal with the Haredi in 1948 to support the state of Israel because, and to make Israel a religious state because there were so few of them, and they were all so shattered by the Nazi experience, and so the idea was to get them to be a coalition with the government. There was I don't think there was any expectation that the Haredim would become such a large political force, which they are. I mean, the Jerusalem shuts down at 2:00 every Friday, and it doesn't reopen until Saturday night, basically Sunday morning. That's not the choice of secular Jews.
All right, let's go to, we have other, I want to make sure we have time for everyone's questions. So we have Jerry Langer, did you want to?
Okay.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. So I'd like to move away from your presentation on the city per se, and maybe go back to the movie. So I think you're correct that for many people in Jerusalem, the issue of the Palestinians in general and the Palestinians in East Jerusalem is not their main concern. It's very easy in Israel, any part of Israel, any part at least in in pre-1967 Israel, it's very tempting to go about your life as though the Palestinians didn't exist, and that's certainly true for some of the populations in Jerusalem. But with respect to the movie, I don't think she was ignoring all the facets that you talked about that occupy a lot of other people. But I think that was what drove her. So it was her father's disappointment in the way, in the inability to make progress on the Jewish, Israeli, Palestinian or Arab issues, and what he saw as the lack of morality in Israeli politics that, at least as she presented, I think, in the movie, that led her father to become so disillusioned and to leave. And it was therefore her focus took up, and you mentioned the relationship between father and daughter, but her focus was not on the Haredim, because it wasn't her father's focus. It wasn't his source of disillusionment. This source of disillusionment was more what was happening between Arabs and Jews. And therefore, when she made a decision to go back to Jerusalem, she did it focused on the Palestinian Jewish-Israeli situation, to the exclusion of these other things. So I think it's not that she didn't know about them. It's that simply wasn't her focus. And then when it was clear that was going to destroy her family, she had a choice. She could stay alone, or she could take her family and leave.
By the way, just a quick note, they moved to Montreal. They're living in Montreal now, which works out well for their, and they said that like on the day they arrived, the sons wanted to join hockey teams, and they're apparently settling well there.
So I think it was, the focus of that filmmaker was simply different than the focus you might have brought to it, which might have been a broader focus. But she was really focused on this issue. And I think you're right, it does go back to her father, as she also talked about.
I mean, I agree with you completely. And I, when you're asked to look at a movie and then talk about it, I took my social science license to talk about what she didn't see. That's what she saw. Then that's, but she also, I mean, what I wanted to do with this talk was, if you don't know anything about Jerusalem and you watch that film, that's not Jerusalem. That's her Jerusalem, and there's nothing wrong with her experiencing that Jerusalem. It's just it's not representative of the daily lives of most Jerusalemites. But that was her. I took great liberties to separate myself from her.
That's all right. Thank you. All right, we'll go with Fran and then Stan Messer. Okay, go ahead, Fran.
So I'd like to ask a question about the movie itself. I understood that her husband was an Algerian Muslim who had grown up in France. Do we know that he was Jewish?
He at one point talks about being a Jew in France, and that it was nothing compared to the discrimination he felt as a Mizrahi in Israel.
Oh, he said that. I missed that part. Okay.
Okay.
It was easy to miss. I missed it too.
All right. Go ahead, Stan Messer.
Yes, hi. So about the filmmakers leaving Jerusalem, I don't think she had given up on her dream, and I think she was getting acclimated to Jerusalem. I think everything had to do with the very difficult decision that she had to make, namely, was she going to keep her family or was she going to stay in Jerusalem? And in the end, she decided family was more important. But I think if she had had her druthers, and you'll tell me if you think differently about this, if her husband had been agreeable, she would have stayed.
that was my, I don't know, that was my sense, yeah.
I won't take issue with that either. On the other hand, she could leave. Most Israelis in Jerusalem don't have the opportunity to just say, you know, my marriage is falling apart, or, you know, my kids, well, her kids were actually pretty happy there, which was so interesting in itself. That I was talking about her ability to basically separate herself so easily from Jerusalem, that she didn't really live there. She was visiting.
But what makes you think it was easy for her to separate? I had the feeling that it was really a struggle for her to do that.
I'm not saying
What
it's
might
easy.
have come into it, by the way, was the fact that one of her children was saying he's not Jewish. He doesn't want to be Jewish. You know, he was identifying with his Muslim friend, but she was struggling with these things. And as I say, if the husband had gotten the job and acclimated, I think they'd be there, not in Montreal, my hometown, David Sigmund's hometown.
Go ahead, Kevin. Thank you, Stan.
Hey, Shalom. Thank you so much. It's such an interesting discussion. So I'm really curious. I thought it was a very interesting film, but I'm curious what you think about. I thought that it sort of gave us a very narrow lens of parts of Jerusalem. You know, like exposing her children to these protests, and which is obviously all very real. And like I almost thought it was I don't even know the word, like sort of laser beam narrowly focused without giving a little bit more of the different tapestries. And then the second part of it was it almost then was like all or nothing, like Jerusalem or nothing. And like to me, a city like Haifa might have been, you know, more of a place to consider going. Her children could still play hockey in Metula. It's a little bit of a drop. But like, you know, I was just curious about that. Like, it just seemed like all or nothing. And Haifa would seem like a place where there's like a dugma or an example of, you know, of people of different backgrounds living together. So what was your thought about that?
You know, Haifa and Jerusalem is like night and day. And I mean, it's a wonderful city. I think her lens was very focused on Jerusalem, and that's where she grew up. I don't think I don't think in her mind she ever considered moving into a city like Tel Aviv or Haifa. She could have done that if she said, I want to stay in Israel. But it's the name of the movie is what, P.S. Jerusalem. That seemed what she wanted to do. But she could have done that. I mean, that would have been very different. And the divisions between Palestinians and Jews in Haifa are much tamer. I mean, they go back and forth, but they're much tamer. And there isn't such a large Haredi population. It doesn't feel as complicated. There is this kind of talk about how everyone in Haifa gets along. I'm not sure how much that is true, but I don't know, you know, so I don't know. Go.
Okay. Fran, you had another question? Or well,
Yeah. So
yeah,
to me,
and then we'll get to Igor.
the real emphasis of the movie was the unpleasant relationship between the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim. And I don't understand why you have focused 100% on the Haredim. The Haredim do create the atmosphere in Jerusalem, but the tension between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim is totally different. And that's where the movie was.
I did mention that. I did certainly mention that in the beginning.
Okay, but that's where the emphasis that was the point of the whole movie. I mean, he was in the car at one point and the soldiers were cursing him out.
Okay. All right. I mean, there were a lot of conflicts going on. Igor, you had a question.
Yeah, I agree with, first of all, I thank you very much for giving me word. I actually also missed the point brought by a friend. I missed that her husband was actually Jewish, but thank you for pointing out, Ms. Shlay, that he was a Jew. And I agree with Ms. Messer. And about Haifa, I would say I lived in Israel 3 years. They say the Haifa works, Tel Aviv has rest, and Jerusalem prays. But I have two questions. Number one is a small one. Why we never saw the director of the movie? Why she decided to be incognito? And the second question is Mr. Elon, the famous writer, obviously he's hated by Haredim, but is he still in adoration by the left population, secular population of Israel? Thank you.
Um, I'm not sure, I don't know anything about the father. I did look him up briefly, but I don't know anything about him and what was the first?
He passed away, so,
Yeah, so I don't know.
at this
I mean,
point,
I
he's a
did,
historical
Right,
figure.
but in the movie, we there was an episode, many books on the shelves written by him. So if he was a famous writer, probably he's still popular among some layers of population in Israel.
But if I can actually our speaker of incitement kind of talked about what happened to the Israeli left. Where did the Israeli left go? And it's just with time since the Rabin assassination, the left and all the figures that the left admires have sort of become less prominent in Israeli
It's
society.
like it deepens my question, right?
Okay. And then as far as why we never see the director,
Right.
I don't know. Does anyone want to throw in? I mean, I'm a film school guy, but I don't want to monopolize it.
why we didn't see the director, meaning her.
Yeah, it's
Right.
It's an artistic
Maybe
choice.
What was your point? Yeah. The
Yeah,
movie
why did you
obviously is
say-
controversial, but interesting. But we never saw her. We saw probably her friend at the very end, right? With 2 kids before departure.
I
That was
guess,
her cho-
I guess my sense was that we saw her through her putting together the movie. She was the editor. She was the filmmaker. That was her.
You're sort of seeing it through her eyes.
Yeah.
Right. But on the other hand, we saw her husband many times,
I
who
know.
was unhappy actually.
But Igor, when you go through your day, how many times do you see you?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm alive,
When you're on Zoom, we see you.
The husband was certainly not always.
Well, was my first movie because before there was Hulu, this time it was Venmo. Thank you for pushing me, to technology.
Okay.
But I do want to say the husband really saw the value of being in Jerusalem for his kids and learning. Remember, I don't know if you remember the scene where he talked about the different values that his kids would have, that they would be more sensitive, and so he did. I mean, he ultimately didn't want to keep that up, but he initially saw some really good in being in a society like the one in Jerusalem, and
Okay.
particularly with the Arab school. Yeah.
One very, if
Last comment, and then we'll close up. Go ahead.
so, Igor, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much.
The one other just quick follow-up was I do think, like, her children were in that Arab Israeli school. Like, it's sort of just following up on what I was thinking about before. It seemed like Jerusalem does seem like much more of a tapestry than the film presented. Like, the film just gave us that obviously very real part and problematic part, but aren't there sections where there is, communities that are a little bit more open, and that Arab Israeli school that she talked about, like, she had the close friendship with that one friend where I thought it was a very moving scene where the boy was crying. But I just would have I would have loved to see a little bit more of that nuance. Like, I felt the film, I don't know if you felt that, but I felt the film gave you just that one side, and I think there may have been a little bit more nuance that wasn't there.
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, some of that, my expertise is largely in housing. I taught housing for years, and so I constantly think about housing markets, and the way in which markets often respond to mixing people is that there's a fall off in demand for a particular group, and that's how racial change works in this country. So I don't know. I didn't see any neighborhoods where there was much camaraderie between Arabs and Jews. And and the problem with mixing Haredim with secular Jews is that the Haredim have very strict rules on how to behave, and if you don't, and so it's very problematic for secular Jews who want to drive out of their neighborhood on Saturday when, I mean, there have been blockages of roads and things. I mean, so there's lots of conflict over the different ways of life. I mean, and I don't know how far away everybody is all the time from each other. My first night in Jerusalem, I was living in the French Hill, and I woke up to Muslim prayers on the loudspeaker, and I thought, what the hell is going on here? I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. But so that felt very close by, but I was living, so I don't think there's a lot of mixing. And if there is mixing, it's very transitional, and people are hostile. I mean, people want to keep up their property values just like everybody else. So I'm not sure about that.
All right. Thank you all very much.